Welcome to This Week in Local, a Locology podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Locology analysts Mike Boland and Charles Loughlin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Mike Boland, and my guest host today is Jason Cross, who's SVP of Product at Newfold Digital. So, Jason, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, we'll have fun with this. So, Jason, you're looking at a lot of news items that mostly sort of trace back to your role at Newfold, particularly something that Google is doing around generative AI. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, prior to joining Newfold, I spent a good part of my early career in media. And so this story kind of hits home, and all the amazing journalists out there that we all read every day in our favorite publications. But Google has been partnering with and been working with news organizations for a while to find common ground to partner together. And they've now are bringing this new tool called Genesis, which is an AI tool that they believe can help, big and small journalists and media organizations use AI to, create news copy. And this hasn't been publicly shown, but they have demoed it to some of the bigger players like New York Times. And it sounds like some of them some people are there is opportunity. I think some critics would say maybe too far. I think for people that pay nowadays quite a bit of money for a print and or digital subscription, you're paying for trusted, really deep rooted journalists that that you follow and that they fact checked. And so it will be interesting to see where this goes, because it all comes down to trust. If the journalists don't trust the output of this assistant that will help them create more content, more copy, or tell a better story, it actually could slow down the production of what is already limited journalists in the market. So be interesting to see where it goes. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the sort of macro effects and the ripple effects of this are fascinating. And I think one of the things that jumps out at me is the potential sort of controversy or backlash, particularly as this coincides with sort of the writers and actors strike happening in Hollywood, where one of their sort of big bones of contention is studios and production houses using AI in different ways. I think that there's some sort of misguided knee-jerk reactions to AI going on there. Some of it's fair, some isn't. We won't get into that, but I think that it's interesting with these types of moves. One of the first reactions, and we're not really seeing a lot of this yet from journalists to the degree that we've seen it from sort of film actors and writers, is, the sort of, will this take my job sort of angle. And I think that, Google's smart, because I think with all of their communication, they have sort of positioned this to a lot of those big publishers they met with as something that is meant to help journalists rather than replace them. So some of these sort of rote aspects of journalism, and I should say, just like your background in media, I used to be a reporter at Forbes magazine, the print magazine, and I've spent a lot of time throughout, digital media and print media. And, for me, from my perspective, some of the types of formats of writing articles, like let's say earnings statements or just reporting on earnings, are very rote, and they're a pain in the butt. I would actually welcome being freed up from that to write a sort of deeper article or get started on the article that comes out the next day or the day after that, that's meant to, tell a deeper strategic story on why Google or Amazon or who's ever earnings went up or down and that kind of thing. So I think that that's the way they're positioning it. I think the question is, like we see in Hollywood, will it, no matter what, just be received with some of this sort of fear? And, some of that, I don't want to slam the fear. Some people are, afraid that their jobs could be taken, and that's legitimate. But anyway, that's where my mind goes in terms of the potential controversy.
I think that, I spent a lot of time in big media and mid-size and small. I think as you see across the country, the small markets are starting to shrink and disappear.
There you go.
They might have one journalist, 10. And this tool could help that limited workforce Like imagine if it just did the city council updates, or it pulled all the data from all the sports and actually gave that journalist like some thematic story that they could then take and write, so they're not spending time researching and pulling facts when they have limited capacity and time. See that as a potential win.
Yeah, I like that angle because yes, if you are sort of time constrained or if you're stretched thin like those smaller market journalists, it should be seen as a tool to help you sort of fill in some of the gaps in your workflow. And I think the places where generative AI are doing the best job are when that formula snaps into place. And a few examples are a lot of artists. Some artists, again, are shunning it. Some are leaning into it to do things like some of the rote parts of their workflow, like placeholder elements or background images, or, same thing with writers. If you're working on a script, like you need to sort of work on the overall story arc of the script. You don't have the time to slow down, and you can say, ChatGPT, find me a joke about elephants, or whatever the case may be. It's the
Right.
sort of filling the gaps. You could say the same about a lot of professions where there are rote aspects and there are very sort of thought intensive aspects, like law comes to mind. So I think that the winners of this are those that are going to sort of lean into those parts of AI that can actually help you in your job. That seems to be, and of course that's easier said than done. And I do acknowledge that some people are afraid for legitimate reasons that it could be, if you're a lawyer, is it gonna take my job? Maybe if you're in
Yeah.
trademark law or some of those,
Yeah.
wrote as writing wills. I don't know.
I think the biggest issue will be, can Google or whoever else does these actually build a service that is 100% reliable to not
There you go.
pass like inaccurate information or like on nuances that it can't connect, and it actually would do
Yeah.
more damage to that brand, that journalist, and overall local journalism. Just that it has to be at 100% right all of the time if it's going to be used in that forum.
Absolutely. And that point actually speaks to alleviating some of the fears, if there are fears among journalists that this is going to take my job. I think they're giving it too much credit. It's actually not that good. It still requires a human to really go over it and massage it and do the actual sort of knowledge work around it.
Yeah.
And I think you probably remember that CNET sort of
Yeah.
went about this in a maybe arguably ham-handed way, where they started just rolling out generative AI articles without telling anyone. And I think that they sort of went light on the fact checking stuff, and they really got slammed for it.
Yeah, that is another good point, is that any entity is going to just publish verbatim AI content. It just like when it was like this content was like an ad, where we had
Yeah.
sponsored content and some were labeled sponsored, some were not, and it was hard to tell. That would be a critical component. I think Instagram and some of these other social networks are even thinking about a post, flagging it if it knows that it's been generated by some large language model at some point. I think that is a good best practice.
The transparency and the technology that guides that transparency is going to be huge here. We talk about that a lot on this podcast, and I think that gets to the key word that you mentioned earlier, which is trust. And I think that engenders trust if the publishers, if the social media companies, anyone that is just creating content can adequately do that part.
Yeah.
Now, Jason, I want to sort of segue here from this into something that you worked on recently. One of your roles at Newfold has been to sort of be a champion of AI. And on a previous episode of this podcast, we talked about something that a Newfold company, web.com, did, where it started to integrate AI in ways that really made sense. I mean, some of these integrations in early days are making sense, some aren't. I've always thought that this is something that really makes sense because it helps small businesses or people that aren't natural writers, work on the copy for their pages, or even a really cool aspect of what you rolled out. And I'll let you, jump in here in a second, but just to tee you up, is also an AI generated domain name finder, which I think is really a pain point for anyone that's like looking for the right domain name. And it's really leaning into the aspects of the technology that can really be assistive. And that formula we just talked about with Google, like where is it additive and not like scary? I think this is one of those examples. So tell us a bit about what you did there.
Yeah, I think for us, you're right. AI becomes a buzzword. It becomes something people are just chasing around. So we had to hold our excitement and really focus on, do we need it? What problem will it solve for the customer? And I kind of think of it as three things. Like, first, this AI will help us attract more customers, and the customers have always had challenges to use DIY tools because there's always learning curves to find a domain, build a website, launch it, market it. It's complicated, right? And for Newfold, the second is we have a big base of customers, and many are in different life cycles and are not ready to move on, and there's friction for them to take the next step. And we believe AI can help us cross-sell them in a way that's natural and easy for them to take the next step. And then as you think about all of our brands, because we have many brands and we're consolidating our technology and our user experience, is that AI will help us like meet the customer where they are and remove that friction and get them onto that next thing right then and there as quickly as possible. And so as we started to think about those three things, we started with the first part of your journey is you wake up the next day and you're like, I have this idea. I'm going to create this new company, right? And you think about, I need to get a domain, and it requires just tons of time to think about a name that hits your dream, like this idea you have that makes sense and that's still available as a .com.
Available, right?
And because most people default to .com, I need a .com top level domain. And so we took the magic of what we do well, our bread and butter is let you buy domains. And now we just let you enter in, like, I'm looking to be a dog walker in Menlo Park, California. I specialize in this, that, and another thing. And it will generate business names as well as .com availability and other like
Other
.me,
TLDs.
.online. Yep. And it helps people take like this, 30 minute time that they would spend thinking and really get them like thinking, and just they can keep going through screens and find the right ones that match them. And then we can move them right on to their journey. So it's a good kind of step to get them to start. And then once they get in and they're starting, we felt like initially creating this sandbox environment to create ideas and brainstorm is a good next step. So we have a tool where you can go create social posts, you can create homepage copy, product names, product descriptions. You're starting to like bring your ideas to life, and we hope those ideas spark next steps. And so far, like, it's going well, and we're thinking about now the next step is we're working on how to take that information we get from the domain into basically building the site for you, right? So we kind of get enough information, what kind of things you like, who you are, what your goals are, and we can skip every step in between and get you right to a site that is pretty good and ready for you to share on social, and kind of push you a little bit out of your comfort zone to start taking that risk and going forward.
Yeah. And you're speaking to a lot of the sort of pain points of a lot of small businesses that got into that business because they are either a chef or a florist or, a nail artist, not necessarily digital marketers and writers. So I think this really speaks to sort of that traditional pain point. And I think that the domain name part is the most interesting to me for two reasons. One is it's always harder than it looks. And one of the things I love about your tool is that it doesn't just allow you to sort of, type in some keywords and then it spits back some sort of variations on that, but it does what I like to call contextually adjacent sort of suggestions. Yeah. So synonyms and other things that you just may never have thought of. And I love that. And another, to the TLD point, you're right. No one ever thinks beyond .com, but there's a lot to be said by going with other TLDs, particularly because I always tell people this, that, we always sort of assume that people are doing sort of direct navigation, like to my.com.
Yeah.
Really, the majority of traffic is Google. And Google, in terms of its sort of SEO and ranking factors, doesn't really weigh your site higher if it's a .com versus a .co versus a .io or whatever it is. And I think that this always reminds me of when I established my personal website about 10 years ago. And I realized all these TLDs exist, and I got sort of creative. So my name is Mike Boland. Instead of looking for MikeBoland.com, which of course was taken, I used the .land TLD, and my
Cool.
website is MikeBo.land. And just sort of flows together in a succinct way. So I think that helps. If you're doing that for them, that really helps open businesses' eyes to the availability and the opportunity around all those other TLDs they might not have thought of. So now let's segue into the next topic. So this is one that I'm looking at, and this sort of ties back to the first thing we talked about, which is two things: Google and AI. And at that intersection, they're doing some other things. And according to some reporting done by Axios, Google is looking at a lot of GPT-based conversational AI technology, which it's no stranger to. Google has done a lot of deep research in its sort of transformer research. That's the T in ChatGPT. And of course, they've launched Bard and other things. But here, particularly what they're doing, or what they're rumored to be doing based on Axios reporting, is integrating GPT-based conversational AI into Google Assistant. So Google Assistant, of course, is its existing sort of legacy AI voice assistant. And, it's interesting. We talked about something similar on last week's episode, where we talked about the rumors that Apple is similarly rumored to be testing something called Apple GPT. And the big question we asked ourselves there is, what does that mean for the fate of Siri? Siri has long been, in my opinion, sort of an underperforming AI assistant. And if Apple's looking at this sort of GPT-based technology, does that mean the death of Siri? And, those who listen to that episode, and we'll have all these links available in the show notes, may remember that Charles Loughlin, my co-host, asked, well, they could be working on that. Does that mean they're going to kill and replace Siri? Or does that mean they're going to sort of give it a brain transplant with the technology they're now researching? So the reason I've mentioned that is that what Google appears to be working on now is the latter. They've chosen to, instead of replace Assistant, they're simply going to upgrade it through some of these new technologies. So that really got us thinking around the pros and cons and the calculus of some of these legacy AI assistant products and the new sort of standards that are developing for the underlying AI tech and the APIs that are available for conversational AI from the likes of OpenAI. Does this mean we may see, Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa upgrade or potentially be replaced? And I think a lot of that calculus comes down to the existing brand equity versus brand baggage of some of these products. And you could argue for Siri, its brand baggage outweighs its brand equity. Google Assistant, maybe not so much. Alexa has, a different sort of formula there as well. So I think a lot to be said there in terms of continuing to watch what these legacy conversational AI products do in the face of these newer and better technologies bubbling up. So what do you think about that, Jason?
Yeah, our household has all three in it. You got Siri, Google, Alexa, and you're right. You end up like not using them because they're just not helpful. And so I think they've ran their lifespan of usefulness. And so it does make sense to have a more natural, like conversational or intelligent conversation with one of these. It will be interesting though, if each one of those brands are going to hook it to like their core competency, right? So will Siri be more on music and movies, or a connection to your other devices like texting and things like that? Or will Google be like hooked into more conversational related to like real-time news, bookings, and Amazon's
voice search?
Voice search. But it'll be hard because like, are you going to want all three? How will you choose which one? Because which one that you or your family choose to use, because you're going to have more than one in your house. And if you have Apple devices on you're likely going to just default. So it will be, I think for consumers, it will be interesting to see how they bring these to market and
Yeah.
how it resonates, and like why will I want one or the other? And am I upgrading what I have to a new brain that's intelligent, or do I have to buy new hardware? You know?
Yeah. And that positioning is interesting. I think that's actually one of the reasons why Siri is even still alive. I think if Siri were its own sort of startup without a company like Apple that's somewhat reliant upon it, I think the market would have spoken a long time ago,
Yeah.
just in terms of people using it. But I think Apple has given it this sort of umbrella. And not only that, to your point, it's sort of traced the use of that back to all of its products. So Siri is embedded across sort of everything. Like my Apple TV has an actual physical Siri button on it.
Right.
I mean, you can't ask for better positioning for a subpar technology. So I think a lot of its use has just been because it's easy and it's default. So I think that there's a lot to be said there. And you could say the same for, Google and Alexa, maybe not from a hardware perspective, but, Google is the world's homepage. And the fact that there's an assistant button right on the, on that search bar on the homepage really probably gives it a certain amount of traction.
Yep, that's right. And then the partnerships too. It's interesting as all three of these move forward, then the ancillary partnerships that they have, like with Bose and other brands where these
Totally.
are interconnected, will also probably make decision when you're looking to buy speakers, but you prefer, maybe Google over Alexa, but Alexa's default installed, you might choose Sonos or something. So there is
Yeah.
ramifications, I think, for even the partnerships that they choose.
Yeah. Excellent point. So let's actually move on to our Who Won the Week section. So Jason, tell me in your mind who won the week.
Well, I have to choose Barbie the movie. So I think it's like had a record-breaking opening weekend. It's the biggest domestic opening ever for a non-superhero or sequel movie. I have an 8-year-old son, and when him and his friends are swimming, they're singing the Barbie Girls song.
That says a lot.
So he's 8. Last week I had an offsite, and one of my teammates went to the Barbie movie before, like, we had a meeting. And so you see this like huge spectrum of where it resonates here in our culture,
Yep.
and how they brought that to market. I mean, they built an actual Barbie dream house in Malibu, California for the
Mm-hmm.
movie. So I think for everyone thinking about building a product is one thing, telling the story and making it resonate with consumers is another, and Barbie and the marketing team hit a home run.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's quite an accomplishment. So my Who Won the Week is Ford. And the reason I say that is because Ford is ramping up production of the Lightning, F-150 Lightning, which is its EV. It's sort of the EV version of the very popular and longstanding F-150. Previous to, about 3 months ago, it was having all kinds of supply chain issues. It had to sort of limit the output at many of its factories. It was able to iron out a lot of those kinks and actually proactively decided to do some major price cuts. And what it did and what it saw from that was a 6-fold increase in its orders for one of the lines, of several variations. The XLT trim level, 50% growth in its orders. And the reason I think this is interesting is right now it's committing to, by the end of the year, 70,000 units output, and then it's going to ramp up to a run rate of 150,000 units. And I love this because it sort of brings EV culture to sort of American truck culture. The F-150, traditionally the gas version, is I think the most popular automobile in the US in terms of unit sales. And I think sort of combining those things could accelerate overall EV adoption. And I'm thinking my next car, even though it's a few years away, maybe this F-150 Lightning. So I'm pretty excited about that. So we're going to have to actually end it there. So thanks, Jason, for joining us. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you. Had fun.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at locology.com. So please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. So I'm Mike Boland. My co-host is Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. And this week's guest host has been Jason Cross. You can find out more about Jason and Newfold Digital in the show notes. So thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Locology's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Loughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.